Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really digging into some critical research, something that kind of flips the script on how we think about conservation in, well, one of the most vital river systems on Earth, the Mekong.
It's a really important one.
Absolutely. The Mekong, I mean, it's just phenomenal, isn't it? A global hotspot for freshwater biodiversity. We're talking well over 1,000 fish species.
Easily. And that number keeps growing.
And it's not just biodiversity. It supports the world's biggest inland fishery. Think about that, over 2 million tons of fish caught each year on average. That supports, whole economies, cultures.
Livelihoods for millions of people. It's irreplaceable.
So the paper we're unpacking is titled Widespread and Strong Impacts of River Fragmentation by Anthropogenic Barriers on Fishes in the Mekong River Basin. The lead author is Jingrui Sun.
And this paper, it's quite something. It provides a really essential correction, frankly, an alarming one, to how we've been looking at the Mekong.
How so?
Well, for years, most of the focus, almost all of it, was on the big, obvious structures, the massive hydroelectric dams.
Right, the ones that make the headline.
Exactly. But that created this huge blind spot. And what this research does, our mission today, really, is to show you what was hiding in that blind spot. Sun's team used this incredibly comprehensive database, the best compiled for the Mekong ever. And it reveals a threat that's much, much more widespread and, honestly, more serious than we realize.
So the villain isn't just the mega dam.
Not solely, no. It's also the cumulative weight, the sheer number of thousands and thousands of smaller, often overlooked barriers.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Start us off. If the Mekong's so crucial, why exactly are these barriers, big or small, such a problem? What's the core ecological issue?
It really boils down to one word.
Right.
Connectivity. Specifically, the river's longitudinal structure. Fish need to move. It's fundamental.
Right, migration.
Tons of species in the Mekong migrate. You've got your potamodromous fish. Those are the ones living entirely in freshwater, but migrating long distances within the river system for things like spawning or feeding. And then you have diadromous species, the ones that travel between freshwater and the sea. Both types absolutely depend on clear pathways.
So pop a dam in the middle, or even a smaller weir.
And you sever that pathway. It's not just an obstacle. It can completely break their life cycle. If they can't get upstream to spawn or downstream to feed or grow,
The population gets cut off.
precisely, they become isolated. This leads to reduced genetic diversity, smaller populations, and eventually, local extinctions. That connection is their lifeline.
And the big discovery here, the gap this paper filled, was realizing just how many of those lifeline cutters we were missing. We were only counting the really big ones.
That's the crux of it. Previous fragmentation studies, they were using incomplete data.
Mm-hmm.
They largely missed all the smaller barriers. Weirs, sluice gates, small irrigation dams.
Especially in the smaller tributaries.
Exactly. In those low-order streams, the sort of capillaries of the river network, these structures are incredibly numerous, often unreported, sometimes completely unregulated. They just weren't on the map, ecologically speaking.
So how on earth did they find them all? If they're unreported, how do you map, was it thousands of them?
Yeah, it's a huge number, and that's where the methodology gets really interesting. It was a massive compilation effort, but partly driven by technology. They used AI-assisted techniques.
Ah, okay. Scanning satellite images.
Things like that, yeah. Analyzing satellite imagery, combining it with existing geospatial data, field reports where available, building this incredibly detailed picture from multiple sources.
And the result?
The result was this new database with over 13,000 anthropogenic barriers identified across the basin.
13,000.
13,000.
Yeah.
Suddenly, you're not just looking at a few dozen major dams. You're looking at a river system that is profoundly cluttered with obstacles. It completely changes the perspective.
Wow. The sheer scale is, it's stunning. It reframes the whole problem. But, okay, that leads to a massive technical challenge, right? How do you possibly calculate the impact of 13,000 barriers on, 952 different fish species? Each one moves differently?
It's a very complex calculation. They relied on sophisticated modeling centered around two main indices, the population connectivity index, or PCI, and then the key one, the fragmentation index, the FI.
Okay, the FI, what does that actually tell us?
So the FI gives you a percentage. It represents the percentage decrease in connectivity for a species because of the barriers. They model the ideal scenario, what connectivity would be like without any barriers. That's the PCIO. Then they model the current fragmented reality with all the barriers in place. That's the PCIF. The FI is basically the difference expressed as a percentage loss. So an FI of, say, 50 means that species has lost half its potential connectivity.
Right. But how do you make that specific? I mean, a tiny little fish versus the Mekong giant catfish, they don't need the same connections, surely.
Exactly. And that's where the model gets clever. The FI calculation isn't just about the physical barriers. It integrates three critical things. One, the structure of the river network itself. Two, what they call functional connectivity. And this is key, that's based on the species' own dispersal ability. How far can this specific fish actually swim? How fast? What kind of habitats does it need?
Ah, okay, so it's tailored.
Very much so. And the third element is simply the length of the available habitat. So
Yeah.
it combines the river's shape, the barrier locations, and the fish's own biology.
Let me pause you there, make sure I've got this, and our listeners too. The model isn't just saying barrier here blocked. It's asking, for this specific fish species, given its swimming ability and needs, could it theoretically reach that vital upstream spawning ground if there were no barriers?
Precisely.
And then, with the barriers in place, it calculates how much of that necessary travel is now impossible for that species.
That's exactly right. They painstakingly reconstructed the potential distribution ranges for all 952 species using those biological traits you mentioned. And they grounded this model by using 5 decades of actual fish occurrence data from the 1970s right up to the 2020s. It's a huge effort to model reality as closely as possible.
Okay, so they crunched the numbers. 952 species, 13,000 plus barriers. The big reveal.
Yeah.
What did this incredibly detailed picture show about the state of the Mekong's fish?
Well, the headline finding is, it's pretty stark. 93%.
93.
93%. That's 881 out of the 952 species they analyzed. They already suffer from decreased population connectivity because of these barriers. It's not a future threat. It's happening now, basin-wide, affecting almost everything.
That's staggering. Are some groups hit harder than others?
Yes. Definitely. When you break it down, the fragmentation index, that FI score, it correlates very strongly with migratory behavior. Those potamodrome fish, the freshwater residents that need to migrate within the river, they had the highest average FI, a score of 42.45.
Meaning they've lost over 40% of their needed connectivity, on average.
On average, yes. They are profoundly impacted because their entire life cycle plays out within this increasingly fragmented freshwater network. They have nowhere else to go.
And does this loss of connectivity map onto their conservation status? Are the most fragmented species also the most endangered?
Absolutely. There's a strong link. Species listed as critically endangered, the CR category, they experienced an average FI of about 34.48. When you see connectivity loss that high, you see populations crashing. We already know the Mekong giant catfish, Pangasianodon gigas, it's critically endangered. Its population has plummeted by maybe 80% in just the last couple of decades.
Wow.
This data really strengthens the case that fragmentation, the severing of connections, is a primary driver behind the decline of the most vulnerable species.
Geographically speaking, where is it worse? Is it all concentrated along the main stem where the big dams tend to be? Or is it more spread out?
That's another really interesting finding. Yes, the highest species richness is often found in the middle and lower parts of the main Mekong Channel. And yes, that area does have a high density of barriers, including large dams. But the study identified specific subbasins, like the Chai-mun region in Thailand, as being the most fragmented overall.
And what's driving it there? Not mega dams.
Not primarily, no. The severe fragmentation in places like the Chai-mun is driven overwhelmingly by the sheer density of small dams and sluice gates. Thousands of them.
Okay, so this brings us right to that central debate you mentioned earlier. Is it the few big Goliaths or the thousands of little Davids causing the most damage?
Precisely. This study really tackles that head on. It's been a long-standing question in river ecology and management.
Yeah, because intuitively you picture one massive dam wall, and it seems like that must be the ecological catastrophe, right? How can thousands of tiny weirs possibly add up to more impact?
It requires thinking about impact differently. We need to separate the impact of an individual barrier versus the cumulative impact of all barriers across the whole system.
Right. What they found was this. Individual large dams do cause greater fragmentation per barrier. especially for certain types of long-distance migratory fish. One huge dam is obviously a massive, often impassable obstacle. However, when you calculate the total basin-wide loss of connectivity, that overall FI score summed across all species and the whole river network, the cumulative effect of all the small dams and all the sluice gates actually contributed more to the total fragmentation than the large dams did.
Wait, say that again? The small stuff added up to a bigger overall problem than the big dams.
Yes, across all species, the cumulative impact of small dams and sluice gates was the most significant factor driving habitat fragmentation. In fact, the study suggests their combined effect nearly doubled the total fragmentation compared to if you only consider the large dams.
Wow. Okay, that completely changes things. Decades of conservation focus, media attention, policy debate have centered on large dams. It suggests a major misallocation of attention, perhaps, or at least an incomplete picture. The problem isn't just a few major roadblocks. It's like the entire road network is riddled with potholes and minor barriers. It's death by 1,000 cuts distributed across the whole system.
It's like focusing on blocking the main highway while ignoring the fact that all the local streets are also blocked.
That's a good analogy. And for certain species, those local streets are critical. Think about those sluice gates, often built down in the Mekong Delta for managing water for agriculture or preventing saltwater intrusion.
Right.
For the diadromous fish, the ones migrating between the river and the sea, the study found that those sluice gates were the single biggest source of fragmentation.
So agricultural water management is directly impacting fish that need to get to the ocean.
Directly. It highlights these complex trade-offs between different water uses. The implication for management is unavoidable. You can't just focus on mitigating the impacts of large dams anymore. A huge part of the problem lies with the cumulative impact of these smaller, often unregulated or locally managed structures spread throughout the basin. Addressing that needs to become a major priority.
Which sounds incredibly difficult. If the problem is thousands of small, dispersed structures, many serving local needs like irrigation, what does that mean for practical conservation? Where do you even start? Resources are always limited.
It makes the decisions incredibly tough. You're weighing up different strategies. On one hand, you have things like fish passes or fin ladders on large dams. These are very expensive, often technically challenging, and frankly, their effectiveness for the sheer diversity of tropical fish species like those in the Mekong is often debated. They don't always work that well.
Right. They might help one or two species but miss hundreds of others.
Exactly. On the other hand, you have the option of dealing with the small barriers, but that involves the huge logistical cost of just identifying them all, assessing their specific impact, figuring out who owns them or relies on them, and then potentially removing or modifying thousands of structures.
And removing a small weir might negatively impact local farmers who depend on it for irrigation.
Precisely. So the management becomes about strategic trade-offs. Do you invest heavily in trying to improve passage at one major dam, potentially benefiting a few high-profile, maybe endangered species? Or do you try to tackle the dispersed problem, removing many small barriers, which might give broader benefits to more fish communities, but involves immense complexity and local negotiation? There's no easy answer.
Now, this whole picture is built on sophisticated modeling. Did the authors acknowledge limitations? What needs to happen next to really nail down these findings?
Oh, absolutely. They were very clear about the limitations. The results are based on modeling, and models rely on assumptions. A key one is barrier passability.
How easily fish can actually get past different types of barriers.
Right. They had to make estimates, for example, maybe setting weirs as being 50% passable on average. But reality is complex. So future research absolutely needs boots on the ground, or rather, fins in the water validation.
Like fish tagging studies?
Exactly. Tagging fish, tracking their actual movements, monitoring specific barriers to see what really gets through and what doesn't. That real-world data is crucial to refine and confirm the model's predictions about passability.
And the study mostly looked at movement up and down the river, right? Longitudinal connectivity.
Primarily, yes. And that's a huge part of the story, but not the whole story for the Mekong.
Because fish also move sideways.
Exactly. This points to a critical direction for future research: lateral connectivity. So many Mekong fish species, maybe even the majority in some areas, rely on the annual flood pulse. When the river rises, it spills out over vast floodplains and into connected wetlands. Fish move laterally into these flooded areas. It's absolutely essential for spawning for many species, and as feeding grounds for juveniles, it's a massive nursery.
And that kind of movement is threatened by different structures. not just dams in the main river.
Right. Lateral connectivity is blocked by things like flood control levees along the river banks, embankments for roads, sometimes local pumping stations that manage water levels. These prevent the water and the fish from moving between the main channel and the floodplain habitats.
So future models need to add that dimension too.
Definitely. To get the full picture of fragmentation, especially as climate change starts altering flood patterns, we need models that incorporate both longitudinal and lateral connectivity and the different types of infrastructure that block each.
Beyond just the physical blockages, barriers do other things too, don't they? What else do the authors suggest needs to be factored in?
Yeah, they emphasize that barriers aren't just walls. They fundamentally change the river's ecology. They alter flow regimes, dams, store water, and release it based on human demands, not natural cycles.
Which messes up the timing for fish.
It can completely disrupt the natural cues, like changes in flow or temperature, that trigger spawning migrations for many species. So future assessments really need to integrate these altered flow regimes. They also need to consider things like the disruption of sediment transport, which affects downstream habitats, and even the increased risk of invasion by non-native species, which often thrive in the reservoir-like conditions created behind dams. It's a whole cascade of impacts.
So if we're boiling this down, the core takeaway seems to be this really profound shift in perspective needed. We can't just stare at the giant, obvious dam projects.
No.
We have to recognize the silent, creeping, cumulative damage caused by literally thousands of smaller, often ignored structures spread across the entire river network. It's a system-wide problem.
It really is. And this Mekong study, it acts as a crucial warning, I think. If a globally important river basin like the Mekong, which is still relatively less developed compared to, say, rivers in Europe or North America, is already showing 93% of its fish species impacted by fragmentation.
What does that imply for those more developed river systems?
Exactly. It begs the question. What percentage of fish populations in heavily managed rivers worldwide are similarly affected by the cumulative impact of overlooked local infrastructure? We might be vastly underestimating the problem globally.
That is definitely something to think about, a sobering thought to end on. Thank you for walking us through that complex research.
My pleasure. It's critical work.
Indeed. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this deep dive into the widespread impacts of river fragmentation on the Mekong's incredible and increasingly threatened fish diversity.